Stranger Things is due to kill off a couple of characters before it's officially done. With the threats developed and the risks at play, and with this being the final season, now is a perfect time for the Duffers to remove that plot. Final episode, we'll start seeing some of the consequences. Have them kill off so many red shirts and Dr. K's confrontation, which is why it makes letting go that much of a storyline, which the series will likely aim for considering it's the final season. What? Stranger Things is officially over, and if there's anything I've learned from this series, it's that it was completely carried by its cast and crew and not its writers. Now, if you enjoyed this final season or the series as a whole, that's absolutely fine. You have every right to, and there's a lot of enjoyable qualities. But in my opinion, this series has always balanced one very specific narrative criticism. How much of the show was creative genius utilizing popular media and homages to articulate this really well-crafted story they're trying to tell? And how much of this was just people throwing spaghetti at the wall, pulling from popular culture because they knew it worked and hoping it would stick? And honestly, after this final season has wrapped up the series as a whole, I can easily see why the Duffer Brothers wanted it to be a one-season anthology series. And while I'm not going to be reviewing all the seasons, as there's a lot of good ones in there, I will instead be going on a rant, particularly about Season 5. As for me personally, I found this final season of the show to be extremely disappointing. And again, while the performances, the set design, and everything the crew contributes is actually pretty effective within the story, for those who have been watching the channel, you know I've been eagerly waiting for how this season will play out, and I'm someone who does prefer more high stakes and dark moments within a show, especially if it's already been narratively introduced. I have a whole video explaining why I think death is important to the series and how it's so vital, and if you want to hear my thoughts on death as a whole, feel free to go watch that one. And while you didn't necessarily have to kill off half the cast in this final season, it still would have been much more impactful to have some fitting character deaths considering the stakes they were all dealing with. From pacing issues to everyone starting out the season like everything's completely fine and slowly everything escalates, this entire season feels like just another season of Stranger Things, and not the final installment to a story that's been spanning over 10 years. Specifically, very resembling of Season 3 for me, especially when it comes to that final battle, which felt like a direct recreation of the final battle in Season 3. Either way, it fell short of what could have been a fantastic season with its many loopholes, pacing issues, and disregard of characters that should have been a little more important within this final installment. Let's go ahead and start with what I would consider to be the biggest sin of the entire narrative, and that would be making Vecna, your big bad, such an unthreatening loser. Seriously, it feels like nobody's actually scared of this guy. In Season 4, it felt like this otherworldly creature that could tap into your mind and snap your limbs at any moment, and you were just crossing your fingers that you wouldn't be cursed next. Yet when Season 5 opens up, and the idea of Vecna still looming out there, nobody actually seems that worried.
We kicked Vecna's ass last year, but I think he just fled across this bridge back to the abyss to lick his wounds.
What a pussy.
Everyone talking about him like he's an annoying pest from the Upside Down they have to keep dealing with. And not this dude who can literally tap into your mind at any moment, even across dimensions, and completely mess you up. But this same lack of fear is also present when it comes to the new characters, like the kids. The kids who may be afraid when Vecna's literally charging them, but otherwise treats them like a joke. And it doesn't help that his biggest weakness is entering a cave, where the kids could easily just mock him from the other side. Everyone just sort of bullies the dude, and he doesn't really come off as a Pennywise type creature to be bullied. But it does kind of make sense he's a victim of bullying, as he is a complete loser, and I mean that literally. He doesn't get any wins this entire final season. Some could argue even the entire series. He fails to negotiate with the scientists, resulting in him encountering the Mind Flayer. He fails at escaping Hawkins' lab and living a normal life. He fails again at escaping Hawkins' lab and gets sent to another dimension. He succeeds in kidnapping Will, but that didn't really last very long. And he also succeeds in the final season kidnapping all the children at the military compound, which also didn't amount to anything. No, Vecna's biggest wins were killing 3 random teenagers in Season 4. Also, he could open up the gates into Hawkins and wait, I guess, for an entire year until he eventually decides to enact his plan, which takes even more time than just opening up gates in Hawkins. This character, who apparently wasn't just a brand new installment and was thought about from the very first season of the show, a character who also has a long-standing history with newer characters and past characters, being someone who's gone to school with them, at the end of the day, this dude didn't feel like he was connected to the story in any significant way. Just like with any other season of Stranger Things, it felt like a random new villain to be introduced to take up more story time, which really sucks because there was so much narrative potential with him. I mean, even with Joyce and Hopper, two people who he went to school with and could have had even just a small moment of dialogue with, considering he had two separate moments in the show where he was one-on-one with them. Yet instead, he doesn't really talk about their history and lets them live, directly resulting in his own defeat. Which brings up another question: why did he let so many people live and go so ham on any character without a name? When it comes to military soldiers or any other person on the show that isn't a main cast, we've seen both him and Eleven snap necks with a simple nod. And yet when it comes to anybody else, they really like to take their time, and I guess that's a big inspiration for the monsters too. The monsters who were apparently under Vecna's control that completely disappeared when he needed them the most. Vecna went from an interesting Freddy Krueger type who may have been innocent at one point and got burned to the point where he became something else entirely, to just being a diluted, gross version of a character like Eleven who decided to be evil. For the same reasons any other villain in a cheesy show or movie would be, which is to utterly reshape or destroy the world. I would have loved to see the Mind Flayer actually show Henry reasons why the world wasn't worth it or humanity isn't worth saving. Unless of course the Mind Flayer just won in the end and Henry didn't realize he lost his own free will. But as far as the narrative goes, he makes it sound like him and the Mind Flayer were on the same page. But I guess you can't expect too much logic considering the foundation of his first interaction with the Mind Flayer also made no sense. I mean, how did a literal child not only get shot in the hand, but also just brutally murder someone to death, not immediately run home to tell his family? Instead, taking his time opening up a weird looking briefcase and picking up a rock with the same wounded hand for such a peak origin moment to a apparently important villain, this felt very predictable. Either way, when you walk away from this series in its entirety, Vecna really only accomplished killing a couple teens and some massive property damage to Hawkins. But outside of that, even the meat monster in season 3 posed more of a threat to humanity than Vecna did. At the end of the day, they tried to build up Vecna as this big overarching villain for the entire series, and really just gave him nothing to do in the end. But let's take a look back at the actual premise for the show, as maybe Vecna isn't the most important aspect. The premise of the show is essentially the Upside Down's existence, and it's proven in this season that it's part of a wormhole. Them trying to add some real-world scientific elements to the story to make it come off as maybe more believable. But honestly, even when it came to the science, they tended to fail in my opinion. Let me pose you a question. If the wormhole is a parallel between both the Upside Down and the real world and the Dimension X or whatever you want to call it, then how come when you enter from the real world to the Upside Down, gravity reverses? However, when you enter from Dimension X into its Upside Down, you keep falling, as if the regular reality is the gravitational foundation point and the primary reality, considering when the worlds come together, the Dimension X is the one shaking and moving, but the real world remains still as it descends towards it. Either way, this doesn't feel like two parallel dimensions on the verge of colliding. It feels like here's the real world with another evil dimension trying to make its way to it. In my opinion, it would have been better just to leave the Upside Down's existence as a complete mystery, as there still are some mysterious elements, like who exactly created the Upside Down? Why did it only span in a radius around Hawkins specifically? These are things I was hoping to get more of if maybe Dr. Owens returned being a prisoner of the military, but Dr. Owens was just one of many characters who were forgotten. But let's talk about the military real quick. The military were just the stereotypical bad guys of the entire season, most times not even making sense. Like when Vecna first comes to take the children and confronts everybody, the military had one person with a flamethrower and that entire crew ready to take him on. I thought maybe this was on purpose and Dr. K was secretly working with Vecna to help provide the children, and she purposely set up her own soldiers to be less equipped to deal with him when he eventually arrived. As I either kept hearing rumors or the duffers say that Dr. K wasn't a Dr. Brenner replacement, but that's essentially all she was. Just like Dr. Brenner, she put pregnant women through brutal experiments in the hopes of creating more children with powers. Yet she was less effective than Dr. Brenner because even when the entire military had them all as hostages, the minute 11 disappeared, I guess they just lost complete interest in them, let alone the fact that they killed several military members, but that most of them have done illegal things altogether and are easily arrestable. It just seems weird that the military would be like, well, 11's gone, let's pack it up and go home. Especially considering how much the people of Hawkins actually know. Remember back in season 1 when the Hawkins lab posed themselves as CPS specifically to find 11 when she was at Benny's? And Benny, who was ready to give 11 over and not cause any problems, was still murdered on the spot. This built the impression that the Hawkins lab weren't ones to leave any doors open and take any chances. simply eliminating any witnesses to their ongoings to prevent any news from spreading out. Yet now in this final season, we have doors opening up and tearing a town apart, and people still struggling to believe any of this strange supernatural stuff is even going on. Either way, the government doesn't come off as this scary illuminating threat that the Hawkins lab folk did when they were hunting down Eleven. And with the big threats and antagonists being dwindled down to essentially a joke or a plot device, it makes you realize this entire season was very reliant on the cast's performance. And again, the crew, production, sound design, all that, but primarily these characters are likable because of what they bring to the table. But if you take these lines and provide them to any less talented actor, you would see how cringy they actually are. Or maybe you can just see the cringe where it is. And sure, in this season, they did spend a lot of quality time paying off character arcs and focusing on small little character details, but this was obviously at the cost of ignoring significant character arcs and details for others. Let's take a look at the characters they forgot altogether. I mentioned Dr. Owens, but we also have characters like Argyle or the Russians, Hopper's deputies within town, Susie, Dustin's supposed girlfriend that completely disappeared. But there's also characters within this very season that they seem to forgot about as well. Groups like Andy and his bully crew, or even Erica and Mr. Clark, who disappeared from the finale after the first few moments. See, when it came to season 5, I was really hoping for some super powerful and emotional sequences that maybe resembled or were reminiscent of the scenes like them finding Will, or the biggest moment of the entire series, Max escaping Vecna. This moment was so powerful, I think it resonated with audiences across the world. Not many people dislike this scene, and that includes the Duffers, who apparently decided to reuse this scene 2 more times in a far less emotionally impactful way. I mean, seriously, you saw the narrative build up to her first escape, and I feel like an entirely different writer or creator went into her second attempts. We see as Max gets lost in Vecna's mind and happens to finally find her way out after being stranded for so long, only to lose out on her chance because she took too much time feeling her hand and walking a little slowly towards a portal she thought would stay, and she's immediately encountered by Vecna, who hunts her down even more until she makes it to the caves, where she continues to be trapped in Vecna's memories for who knows how long. Yet, when Max finally reaches another moment similar to her previous escape attempt, she doesn't decide, maybe I should warn Holly ahead of time that there's only one door and I'm gonna be escaping through it and we might have to find her door separately. No, she doesn't even remember her last attempt at escape, as she takes even longer to escape this time, having a nice, cheesy, warm heart-to-heart when death is literally looming around every corner, both in the real world and within the memories. In my Volume 2 review, I argued structurally it would have made more sense for this conversation to happen while Holly was pulling Max out of the caves, and then the minute they were freed, having either Vecna or no one be chasing them so they just sprint straight towards their doors. But even the dialogue they did have didn't feel realistic. If I was Holly and I saw my door open up to some tube feeding fleshy substances into my mouth, I would have just turned around and went back to the caves, or just pushed Max over and ran into her door. Holly didn't really pay any attention to her predicament she was stepping into. But that brings up an even bigger point. What was Max's plan? I get that journeying through memories, she could eventually find her way out, seemingly at random, but she made it seem like she needed Holly and a journey through her memories to find it. But it wasn't a journey to Holly's origin point in meeting Vecna for the first time, which would have actually been season 1 when they were reaching through the walls and Holly was a child. And it wasn't even the origin point they set up for the show where she was watching a movie and Vecna was outside in the rain. No, apparently the big moment they needed to find to escape Vecna's mind was the moment he took Holly? Again, there's just no logic provided for how the exits work, and yet you introduce these stakes and this intensity like you should get out of there fast and follow this plan as smoothly as you can. But honestly, the plan didn't make much sense. Maybe Max didn't actually have a plan and she just went insane after being lost for so long. Which would honestly explain her lack of acknowledgement that Hopper was alive when she woke up, especially considering she saw memories of him in high school, but also her complete lack of emotion when she finally reunited with Eleven. Eleven, who literally brought her back to life and was crying when she thought she was dead, didn't seem to care much when it came to Max returning. And that's a big thing with Eleven this entire season. We know Millie Bobby Brown is a good actress, but for almost the entire season, and specifically Volume 2, she felt like a robot in almost every scene she was in. But let's get back to Holly for a second. Holly, whose actress gave a solid performance, was definitely one of the more Disney or weaker points of the story for me. What I was hoping for was a kid who would endure a lot and come out the other side alive, similar to Will. Ended up feeling like a Marvel superhero kid who got kidnapped by the big bad guy and was saved by the heroes by the end. And to help illustrate my point even further, these kids were apparently the same age as Mike and Will and all of them when season 1 was around, or you could even argue the same age as the kids in Welcome to Derry, with the only difference being the fact that these kids are genuinely dumb, or at least easily susceptible to influence. These kids were given 2 alternate perspectives and were ready to form a full-on cult to this mysterious stranger that kept visiting them for so long. And they also tended to get extremely violent and hostile with Holly. And sure, she smacked him in the face for no reason in an attempt to escape, but my point being is, when did the Duffers forget how to write children? Remember how season 1 opened with all the kids cursing at each other, naturally talking as they rode their bikes home and laughed and made jokes? Part of why season 1 was so good was that the kids were super believable. Yet when it comes to Holly and her class, who finally get their chance at taking the reins of the story, they felt like kids who were written by someone who heard of kids existing on planet Earth but has never actually seen one, outside of maybe television or cartoons, as that's all these kids acted like, were extremely cartoonish. I can't count how many times Holly was given lines that sounded straight out of a Hallmark film. I honestly thought with Will getting powers, they were building up Holly to open up some dimension doors or use some powers of her own. But honestly, she just ended up being a plot device to amp up everyone's efforts in stopping Vecna. But let's cut back to Will for a second. His character definitely had the best parts of the entire season, and you could consider this final season to be Will's as a whole. And while his character's journey is one of the stronger points of the series, and I do think Noah as an actor performed very well with the material he was given, his story also felt very disjointed. Apparently Vecna showed Will a vision of him coming out that ended badly.
I needed to find my own way. But what matters is that you're still here, and you still think we can be friends.
Friends? No thanks.
So Will, in the hopes of getting on top of that, decides to come out in front of everyone. Again, beautiful scene, but I'm not sure why every single cast member needed to be there, or why it dragged on for so long, or needed to be right before a very important mission to save the worlds from completely colliding. In my opinion, narratively, some restructuring for Will's story would have done the character justice. Let's say when Vecna attacks the Maxi and picks up Will, he right then and there shows Will why he's so weak and maybe gives him the vision of coming out and it not working out well. This could have cut to Robin's words still, of him appreciating himself and being more empowering for his own person, looking inwards rather than the possible perspectives of other people, and resulting in Will using his powers in the great way that he did. This could have been immediately followed up in episode 5 with Will being like, hey, Vecna almost ruined things back there by showing me a fear of coming out. Let me just try to get on top of this before anything else goes down. And then right then and there he could have gathered everyone or whoever he wanted and come out to them specifically. But instead, in retrospect, it feels like his character was very back and forth with his confidence the entire season, in what could have been a steady progressive arc of him gaining his confidence. And it's strange that Will's most heroic moment was at the Max Z and not in the final episode of the series. I figured with Will's coming out scene happening right before the finale, we would get an awesome Marvel style sequence where all the characters are going through the Upside Down, utilizing their skill set and guns or whatever they bring to the table, and while facing off against all the Demogorgons, Demobats, or whatever, Will would be at the center of the group, freezing creatures that get too close so the crew could take them down. A sequence like that would have made this entire battlefield that much more realistic, rather than simply having the crew enter Dimension X, be totally left alone until they see the giant spider, get chased by the giant spider, and then throw stuff at the giant spider until 11 really is the one that stops everything. And yes, you could argue the crew damaging the giant spider creature helped 11 when she was fighting it. In my opinion, the crew felt like they were doing the same things they did back in season 3 and they were fighting at the mall. If you were going to keep this many characters alive up until the final episode, you'd figure you'd give them at least something significant to do throughout this entire final moment. Feels like you gathered everyone together and had no idea what to do with a majority of them, leaving them as a pawn or a foot soldier who is simply adding random damage like everybody else. Some of them barely even had any weaponry, like Steve, who wanted to use a gun but instead decided to pick up Dustin's spear that he used to use with Eddie. Spears that not only didn't save Eddie or anyone of significance, but are also way way less effective considering the circumstances. But maybe I'm wrong, because I never would have expected Dustin and Steve to directly run underneath the giant stomping monster and conveniently find a couple of egg sacs that probably needed to be destroyed and all conveniently got destroyed in this moment of them poking it. I guess it's also convenient there were even eggs under there in the first place. I don't know why they ran underneath this creature. It does not seem like the smartest idea. And as they do all this, they scream like they're getting revenge for their fallen friend Eddie. Eddie, who logically in retrospective is still the one to blame for everything that's happened in that town. No amount of wearing a Hellfire shirt is going to change most of the town's opinions of Eddie being a Satanist or an occult of some kind. Maybe you could have had some narrative give way with his uncle returning and having some words to say, but his uncle will be added to the list of the many people who disappeared in this final season. And also, random thought, whatever happened to Steve's old friends from high school? They just completely disappeared after season 1. Either way, this entire battle goes down. Vecna is very easily defeated after just stretching his arms a few times and barely using his powers. And Will, I guess, does also use his powers to save Eleven when he almost grabs her with his extended hand. This didn't even feel like a heroic moment compared to every other moment Will's used his powers. And Will screaming that they're not afraid anymore and this, that, and the other. I mean, they didn't seem afraid this entire series so far. Again, even when Will is caught in a Vecna curse and being strapped up in his original alien cocoon nightmare, he's still talking back to Vecna, asking him how his leg's doing because he broke it. This speech would have felt so much more impactful if the characters actually were afraid of Vecna this entire time. Either way, the crew defeats the big bad guy, everyone escapes except for the very obvious and very built up character in Eleven. Eleven, who didn't really feel like she got much to do the entire season, decides to sacrifice herself so no one else can gain access to these strange powers ever again. Do we remember that Will, despite throwing up all the exotic matter, still possessed powers and a connection to the Upside Down? And that all those other kids, despite throwing up same matter, probably still do as well? But I guess it doesn't matter, because like I said earlier, the military just completely lost interest in all of them. And I guess that leads to a bigger problem with the series as a whole, in that it keeps pulling its punches. Every season introducing a character that is likable and interesting and then killing them off in the sake of building up stakes. And yet for the characters that stick around, the longer the series goes on, they slowly start to give them more and more to do or highlight their character a bit. Like with Karen, who got several hero moments in this final season after 4 seasons of being completely unaware. And yet when it comes to my boy Ted, someone who is given less of a story than Karen every single season and is honestly seen as the weakest, most pathetic character in the entire show, could have been given at least one solid moment of being a man protecting his family or doing something. I honestly feel like either the opening moment of Holly getting taken was meant to result in Ted getting seriously hurt and him stepping up like a big hero, or he was meant to step up like a big hero when they were escaping from Camazotz, and either way they decided to give both those hero moments to Karen instead. Or maybe the writers just hate Ted and wanted him to be the biggest loser of the entire show outside of Vecna, as while Ted didn't really do anything important, he still bagged a baddie like Karen Wheeler, versus Vecna, who never really got any serious relationship outside of Bobby Newport's sister, Patty. Oh, you mean you didn't realize Bob in season 2 actually had a sister who was directly tied to Vecna as a character? And is actually still alive canonically within this point of the show? Maybe that's because they took most of Vecna's history and kept it locked behind a play you had to pay for and go find, rather than sharing this story with everyone online or even as a show on Netflix. But there's no need to worry because none of Vecna's history really matters in the end anyways. We don't even get a visit to any moments from the play when he's traveling through his memories. No, instead what we got was characters riddled with plot armor, surviving things they really shouldn't, but also not being utilized how they could. With a very predictable ending that could have been guessed from the very first season, with the many punches pulled, plot arcs forgotten, and happy Disney elements introduced, I have to say I walked away from the final season of Stranger Things extremely disappointed in both its overarching plot and character arcs, or lack thereof. And while there are definitely a lot of positive qualities to this final season, this is not a review of said season, this is a rant. A rant I was really crossing my fingers I wouldn't have to make, and one I feel really needs to be put out there. Either way, what are some alterations you would have made to the story to make it a little more cohesive or narratively satisfying? Or if you thoroughly enjoyed the season, what are some counterpoints you have to the many criticisms I could have brought up? Either way, I appreciate the feedback, appreciate the support, a likes and a thumbs up goes a long way,